So today on Fitness, Feelings and Feminism, I have my lovely friend Rob, and he's on here to talk about, well, everything Rob related.
Everything Rob related.
So we'll just dive straight in, shall we? So you are no, you still do your performing and stuff like that. So you've gone from like performer, this is performing.
Is that you performing?
This is me performing.
Yeah, right.
To counselling. So as in studying counselling. Yeah. I don't just mean to going into counselling.
Yeah, we need to just smooth,
Yeah, so how did this happen? Like, how did you find yourself like gravitating towards going into a career change?
Very gradually, I guess, after lockdown, like a lot of people. However, when I think back about it now, even when I was in my latter years of high school, I knew I wanted to be a performer. I set out, that was my vision, that was my goal. I was completely goal orientated.
Yeah.
My grades were sort of, I don't know what the grading system is now, but they were sort of average C's and that. But I was completely...
I was going to make fun of you then, and then you said the same grade and average as me.
Yeah.
I think it's like 1s and 2s now.
Yeah, oh yeah.
These kids.
1s and 2s and 3s now. So I just had this drive from pretty much about probably 10, where I knew I was going to be an entertainer. I knew I was going to be an actor, a singer, a performer. It was something that was literally, I couldn't switch off from. And obviously as a kid, everybody tries to dissuade you from, oh, you'll be fine, you'll grow out of it. And
it's a lot of, because a lot of us performing, no matter how good you are, you're relying a lot on other people noticing.
Absolutely. And, you know, this was 30 years ago now. This was like in the sort of the late 80s, early 90s, when to have a viable career in the performance industry was incredibly difficult. Yeah. Not that I'm saying it's not difficult now. Yeah. It's a lot more accessible. But I just had this drive.
I suppose now you have social media where you can put yourself out there as much as you want. Whereas back then...
We had ravens, we had telegrams.
Pigeons.
You know, people would draw.
You would just sing to a crow and hope that crow would repeat
life
your
was in
tune.
sepia, and I just dreamed of a better life. No, I'm joking. So I've always had this drive. I've always had this tenacity. Before I knew what that was, before I knew anything, I knew that if I set myself to a goal, I would achieve it. So obviously, I've had that strong manifestation, visualization technique. So I don't know why I sounded like that.
Jamaican.
Very Jamaican Geordie, sorry. So that was something that was always there, always prevalent. And I used to say to people daily, I'm going to be on the stage. I'm going to move to London. I'm going to be this. And then it was always followed with, and I want to help people. Always. And I didn't make this correlation until the last couple of years. Yeah. So this drive to be on stage, to be on show, was to fulfill this desire that was in me that I couldn't turn off, no matter how hard I tried, you know? I really couldn't turn it off. And I was successful enough to get through high school with moderate GCSEs, to get onto a drama school in the nearest city, that was Newcastle. So I used to travel an hour and a half a day to get there as a teenager, and that was my beginning of being in the entertainment industry. Yeah. And I just had this drive, this absolute drive, and I moved to London at 20, and I, got a successful, nearly got a record deal, but in those days it was like a management publishing deal. So worked with Polydor, worked with lots of producers, but I was completely not authentic in myself. I was a kid, didn't really know much about
And I think
myself.
that sometimes, every time that something hasn't worked for me, and it's never felt right. As in, I'm not saying that everything that I do authentically works, but I get something out of it at least. Whereas I think when you're not authentic, it shows. You almost like it's like a glass door kind of thing that you've got to knock through.
So that was that. And so I was doing this, living out this fantasy, this reality of wanting to be a performer, but there was almost... I think now I can recognise it was imposter syndrome that was within me, because I had this natural talent which everybody would tell me I had, and I knew I had that. Yeah. But pitted against people in London that had gone to better schools than I had, that had done better jobs, that talked a better game, led me to doubt myself. But it didn't dissuade me, so I carried on with that. And that led me, through a career of ups and downs. And I left the record deal in London, and then I moved into live performance about 27. that is for people that don't know, you know, sort of like production singing, so all over the world in luxury hotels, cruise ships, which is what I still do now. I still perform as a cruise ship performer, on and off, but there's still, through all of that, I kept meeting performers who are very empathetic. They're creatures of a completely different way. You know, they feel differently.
Yeah.
They've got this almost burning desire to be approved, but they're racked with self-esteem issues.
Yeah.
You know, the polarities of being a performer. Not every performer, but a lot.
Do you know what? Sometimes I think it comes hand in hand with passion. Because obviously my job isn't about, well, I perform to a degree, but I think if you care about something enough, you'll get imposter syndrome. Most people will get imposter syndrome because I get it all constantly.
Interesting.
I've had imposter syndrome. I've said this before. I don't know if it's on my podcast or just my Instagram, but I can get imposter syndrome that bad that I think you're not good enough to have an imposter syndrome.
Right.
This is just the truth.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But isn't that fascinating what your brain and your ego and all of those belief systems that are running in your brain are telling you? So they're working underneath that on that subconscious level, but you're still operating to push yourself past that, to have a successful business, to be a successful coach, to have a podcast, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at that, I've moved into trainee counselling mode there. If you look at that, you think, right, interesting. So there's something that I think, I always thought I was a bit of a tortured performer. Like, oh, why have I had to choose this? Why couldn't I have quote unquote a normal job?
Yeah.
That's led me now, after 20 years of performing, to realise that I will have a normal job, and that normal job will be counselling.
Yeah.
So this
How
dance
did
has become...
Yeah. How did you find making that decision from like getting a normal
Well,
job?
I've just to keep it real, I've always had a sort of a secondary job as a performer. I've been burned so many times. The first thing to go is entertainment, as we know, you know. So I've always had...
Don't worry about it.
Bing. I've always had a secondary job. So I've always sort of worked in hospitality or something like that. But the more that I was doing those secondary jobs and still performing, I was coming into contact with more and more people, especially post-pandemic, who were lost, who we were all lost in certain variances, right?
Yeah.
And everybody was sort of saying the same thing, like, I've stopped, I don't know what to do anymore, I've lost my motivation, or actually, this has been the best thing that's ever happened to me, because I've had time to stop and think.
Yeah.
And I started hearing these conversations, and something we'll talk about in a bit is when I started meditating about 12 years ago. From that, I was probably in my late 20s. Once I started doing this Vedic technique, I found my interactions with people, or people that would interact with me, would always say something similar. It took me a while to realise. They'd be like, you're so easy to listen to, or I find myself opening up to you. I feel really calm around you. But I kept obviously ploughing on with that. And the more that I kept having these interactions with performers and people that were working in different avenues of life, they kept saying the same thing. I feel so much better after speaking to you. There's only so many times you can hear that before you start thinking, how can I monetize this?
Yeah.
Right? You know?
Well, it's like I've had these conversations with Chris before now, that I always used to stress on, with my work, the programming. Is the programming perfect? Am I getting them to do the exact right exercises? Am I getting them to lose enough weight on track? Is my online programming good enough? And then I realised that everybody was coming to me because I made them feel comfortable. They weren't coming to me for a state-of-the-art program, because you can't reinvent the wheel anyway. They were coming to me because I made them feel relaxed and comfortable, and they could open up to me. And I was so focused on the exercise element that I didn't realise that there was also a whole other reason why people were looking for a PT.
100%.
Yeah.
Especially, obviously, fitness is really important to me as well. We all know it's linked to having great levels of keeping your mental health in check. I'm not saying it's going to, be
it's
a
not
cure,
going to cure, but
it's certainly going to help.
A good way to start.
And I can validate that from myself, right? But you're absolutely right. They're coming to you in any niche business that you do. People are coming and they're buying into you.
Yeah.
whatever you're doing, whatever I'm going to offer in my services as a counsellor going forward, I can't reinvent the wheel, as you've said. I will be using the techniques that I've learned, you know, from psychodynamic to CBT to person-centered. I'll talk about them in a bit later. But I'll be using me, you know, my rapport, how I am as a person, my experiences, drawing them all together to help interact with somebody. That's what we all want to do in life.
Yeah.
We're all frequencies. We tune into people, we tune out of people. You know, how many times have you kept a friendship going for such a long time just for the sake of obligation?
Yeah.
You know, the frequency dies out. We want to be connected to people. And this is what led me to start questioning me, and back to imposter syndrome. It went straight into fear.
Yeah.
And this thing kept happening. You're just a singer. I'm just a singer. And, you know, I was earning, as a self-employed singer, I've worked regularly a lot, you know. But this fear of, oh, you're just a singer, you've got nothing to offer, was damaging, really. And I was thinking, why am I saying to myself, I'm just a singer? When the other side of the stuff is people saying, wow, God, you're really empathetic and I feel really comfortable with you.
I'm talented.
So I had to push past all of that and think, right, if I'm not just a singer, what am I? That was the beginning of the thought process of, if I'm not just a singer, what else can I do that is going to help me feel as passionate as I have done about performing?
Yeah.
And this was the point just before the pandemic where I was losing interest in performing, because I always think in life, when you come to a crossroads, if you've been doing the same thing, no matter if you love it and the passion's there, if you've been doing the same thing for a long time, it's easy.
Yeah.
It's an easy fit to keep doing the same thing.
And it becomes your comfort zone.
And it becomes your comfort zone. When that comfort zone starts to feel boring, when it starts to feel where you're getting a bit irritable, lean into that. That's when you should really be thinking, what am I not listening to?
Yeah.
What should I open my ears and my eyes to more? And I remember having this, it sounds really poetic, but I was by the cliffs of some beach resort, pondering over the seagulls, the wind blowing in my hair. And I was like...
Shirt open.
always the shirt open. The button far too low. It was a different time. It was 2016. And I was like, what is it? What is it? So I just sat there for ages, and I was, you know, and your mind is completely brain fogged. But I knew something was there, and I was like, and I just had this sort of weird vision of me back in high school, walking past the... we didn't have performing arts in my school. It wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
It was a secondary thing that a teacher did after school in the annex. We all had annex back in the day, didn't we? And I just had this vision of me walking past this annex and thinking, when I'm famous, I'm going to come back here and help people. That was. And I thought, well, you're not famous. That's fine. We've got past that little hurdle.
Yeah.
But why can't you help people? That was the beginning.
Yeah.
And it took a few years. It took a few years of dancing with it, of being, you know, talking about it.
Yeah.
I am a master procrastinator. So what I do, and I know my process is, I will talk about something, and I will talk about it till I get sick of it.
Yes.
And then when I get sick of it, then I action it.
Right.
And it's a process, and I'm aware of it now, and I'm getting better at less of the procrastination and more of the just leaning into the action.
Because they say, don't they, that procrastination. I always remember I joined a running club because I am one of them people that tries everything and then thinks, this is what I'm going to do now. And I joined a running club for all of probably 4 weeks. And I was speaking to this fella as we were running along, and he does a lot of he just does psychology kind of stuff. And we were having a bit of a heart to heart, and I said, I procrastinate a lot. And he said, why do you think you procrastinate? I said, because I'm lazy. And he was like, it's not because you're lazy, it's because you're scared of something. And I was like, whoa. And then obviously I was just saying on the other podcast, since I've gone to therapy myself, one thing that I have learned is that my procrastination can come from a fear of failure. If I don't try, I don't fail.
Absolutely.
Because I can just say, I am going to do that. I just haven't had the time. And whereas really I just don't want to fail at it.
Absolutely. I can't remember who it was, if it was a book I read or if it was somebody that I looked up to, but they said, when you procrastinate, if you've got a list of things to do the hardest thing first.
Yeah.
Don't do what we all do, which is the smallest job, and leave the biggest job till the last. Flip it round if you can. And then once you've achieved that, everything else is...
Yeah.
My belief system is, I don't think procrastination is all negative.
Yeah.
Like my process is, it's a beginning. Maybe it's a conversation with myself that needs to happen until I go, all right, I'm boring myself now.
Yeah.
I've spoke about this so much, I need to move into it. And that
Yeah,
pushes
you
me
see,
into
I think
the next.
I've gone the other way where I'm like, I'm sick of saying this. I'm clearly never going to do it, so I'll give up.
Right.
Whereas that's interesting. How just mindset changes everything.
Yeah.
Like, you can't, is that annoying you?
I'm just going to move it over there so it doesn't... Yeah, be gone.
Be gone,
But
notifications.
fundamentally, everybody has, we've all got the same... We all want, similar things. We want to be healthy, happy. We want our friends to be happy, our family.
Yeah.
A large proportion of us want to be in stable relationships. Not everybody, but...
Yeah.
But we all have a fear of failing. Everybody has a fear of failure on some level. And some people's are greater than others, but they're all the same. The fear of failure is exactly the same. Whether you are scared of not reaching the highest peak of whatever mountain you're climbing or taking that driving test, which, humbling enough for me, was one of the biggest learning lessons of my life.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't need a car because I'd lived in London for 12 years and I'd been all over the world. So I was finally looking at passing my driving test in my mid-30s, which was not a big deal initially, but the fear of failing and the ego that flared up and embarrassment of telling people who were younger than I, who'd been driving more than me, that I was just learning to drive.
Yeah.
Whoa. And the process took 18 months.
Yeah.
And it was an ego flex every time I got
What's
in
your
that car.
opinion on egos then? Just like randomly, because they always seem to get used in a negative way.
100%, yeah. So again, in my industry, I need my ego. If I don't, before we started this podcast, you hugged me and you said, are you nervous? And I went, no, I'm not. Because what I've done is I've zoned right into what I do for a living, which is, the lights are on, let's go.
Yeah.
Right? For me, I've had to build that armor of ego up in order to get on stage, because as a professional, to do it nightly, you lose the excitement, but the adrenaline never leaves.
Yeah.
So excitement and adrenaline are very,
Yeah.
very, very, they're like a little dance. If I don't have an element of looking at myself in the mirror or talking myself into, because, I perform to maybe 1,000 people in these theatres and chips. If I don't talk myself into, right, get out there, do the best you can do, be the best you can be for you, not the audience, just to clarify, for you. If I didn't have that, I don't know if I'd be still walking on stage after 20 years.
Yeah.
And I know this because a lot of people that
Yeah, you've got to back yourself, haven't you? And that comes from your ego. But I think my ego, linked to possibly imposter syndrome, scares me. If I ever, say with my podcast, I was just about to say it then as well, I'm not to be big-headed, but I always get people complimenting me, or if people come on as guests or people have watched it, they've all said, you're such a natural at talking to people and having a podcast. And if I could sit there and think, I feel a natural, I feel like I'm good at what I do, I will think, why are you being so big-headed? You're not that
Isn't
good.
that interesting?
Yeah,
Because
it keeps me in check, but unnecessarily. Why can't I enjoy feeling good at something?
I mean, that's a conversation that we could have for hours.
Yeah.
I think conditioning, how we've been conditioned in the UK within our school system, within our societal system, and how families have been conditioned is not to be too big-headed.
Yeah.
One of the things I used to be told as a kid, which I'm sure didn't mean any harm, was get your head out the clouds. And my response used to be, I like it up here, it's nice. Right? Why? Why do I have to you can be grounded. There's a difference between being egocentric and being obnoxious and backing yourself, and I'm sure as a woman, the conversation around, being a boss and being assertive is no different. But the conversation's always oh, she was a bit aggressive. Was she? Or was she just forthright? Did she just have an opinion?
Yeah.
And she matched you on your level.
Yeah.
Right? Because
Definitely.
men don't get aggressive, do they? They
Yeah.
get, he's alpha, he's bold,
Yeah.
he's making headways.
She's a bitch. She's bossy.
She's a bitch, she's bossy.
Yeah.
So ego is not all bad. It's something that I think we can all work on.
Yeah.
It's something I'm working on daily.
Yeah.
It flares up, and I think if you are in any close relationship, whether that's with a romantic partner or close friends, you can really see that dance happen.
Ego even plays a part in like the smallest of arguments, because even an apology feels like your ego's getting punched, when really you're wanting that off that person.
Yeah.
And I'm not finding them weak for apologising. I'm finding them respectful and knowing when to wave the white flag.
And the interesting thing about that is we get so hung up on apologies, and yes, they're important if they're authentic.
Yes.
But how many times were you as a kid forced to apologise for something that you didn't feel like you needed to apologise for, or you were doing it for the sake of clearing the air and moving on? You've got to be really careful, I think, with that.
One thing I've learned is with apologies, there needs to come forgiveness as well. And there's no point having one without the other. As in, if you're saying sorry for something, you need to forgive yourself for doing it, and you need to believe that you're sorry for it. And if you're receiving the apology, if you want to get over it and you want to accept it, you have to forgive what the apology's for. And that's really freeing.
Yeah. 100%. And I've had that happen with some really close friendships, and we're better for it on the other side. Better for it. Because you can, with certain friends, you can be everything, and they can sort of hold that mirror up, and you can hold it right back.
Yeah.
And you can have this moment. So ego is not bad.
Yeah.
If you check it, if you're aware of it, if you're, and it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, that's
it's
like a very
hard thing to do.
fine dance.
Wow, it's a hard thing to do. It's always it's always going to be something that you work on. That self-development.
Learning what you've learned with your studies, how would you say that studying to be a counsellor has helped yourself?
So here's the mind-blowing thing. So I was like, I'm going to help people. This is what I'm going to do. And I started telling people that I was training to be a counsellor. And the reaction I got from everybody was, wow, you're going to be amazing at that. And after about maybe a month of saying it, I thought, I need to stop saying this now, because this is my ego. This is me wanting validation.
Yes.
This is me wanting people to go, wow. And I was like, it shouldn't matter what they think. It should be what you want, right? So I got over that, and I thought, right, stop telling everybody this story. They don't need to know your story straight away.
Yeah.
If it comes out naturally, fine. The first year was incredibly difficult because I was juggling, traveling internationally. I just started a relationship. There'd been a couple of friend changes who I was living with. All of that was going on. Plus I was working a secular job. And then I decided I was going to be a student again. I had no idea what was going to happen. So the first year, I feel like it was manageable, but I did have imposter syndrome come back.
Yeah.
I used to look at that laptop and be like, how do I form an essay? What do I, and I got into my head, but I pushed past it.
Yeah.
Now I'm at the end of year 2, moving into year 3. When I look back on that journey of the last 2 years, the difference within me is, I can't even begin. The boundaries that I've began to put in place, something I've struggled with for my entire life. Innate people pleasing, wanting to be Switzerland all the time.
Yes.
Gets you nowhere.
No.
It does sometimes. There's a time and a place to say, yeah, you look okay. But when it gets to the real shit, when it gets to people that are manipulating you, even on a level where they don't realize they are, or taking your kindness for weakness.
Yes.
Or you're still serving in that level of, for me, my journey has always been telling people what I need to tell them in the nicest way possible.
Yes. You can do it with tact.
To that person's character. But that hasn't got me many places, because it has in certain instances, but really leaning into telling that person the truth. You can tell the truth and be honest and be kind without people pleasing.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest lesson.
Yeah.
Has been my biggest lesson and will be my biggest lesson.
Because I remember hearing a saying once that said, the person that is a friend to all is an enemy to themselves.
And that resonates completely, you know.
Because when you think about it, if you're constantly pleasing other people, you can't possibly be pleasing yourself. And I think that I've started to set boundaries. And one thing that I've learned is it's a huge grey area because it's like, how do you know whether I'm setting boundaries or am I just being difficult? And at the minute, what my therapist said to me is like, don't worry about the difficult. At the minute, you just need to get used to setting boundaries.
Right.
If you upset people, that's a bridge you can cross if that happens. But don't worry about not putting them there, because if something is going to be detrimental to your mental health, it shouldn't necessarily matter just yet.
And also, why putting yourself first?
Yeah.
Why do you move straight to difficult? Because you've been so used to people pleasing,
Yes.
to fawning over people, to making their lives easier.
Yeah.
They become attached to you because
Definitely.
you become a version of, oh, it's all right because Ellie will tell me this and I'll get this from Ellie. The minute that you put that boundary in place, it shirks people and they start to get wobbly.
That's it. And I think now people are just getting used to my boundaries because I felt like it's really hard because you start putting these boundaries and you feel like a bitch. You feel like you're horrible. You feel like you're not being there for your friends. But it's realistically, I'm being normal.
But do you feel like a bitch, or are you just saying, no, that's not going to work
Yes.
for me? Why is no so difficult
I
to
know.
say, right? And I'm saying that from
Because
myself.
I know it's like as well, like people have had no issues telling me no in the past.
Here's
so
the
why
thing.
do I literally do backflips?
Here's the thing. Let me give you an analogy that I've used loads of times. I'm going to use another one. This was me up until 8 months ago. So I would be in the supermarket and I'd be coming out to the car park and I'd have 5 bags and I'd have my car keys and I'd have my phone and I would have all of these. And somebody would ring me on the phone and I would not put the bags down or my car keys down. I would pull these heavy bags up and put my phone to my ear, and instead of waiting to get to the car and putting the bags down and turning the engine on and putting the hands-free in the car and sitting and putting myself first, I was rushing to whoever was ringing me in order to be at their beck and call.
Yes.
Not their fault, my fault. Right?
Yes. So I had this situation where like something had happened and I was saying to like my therapist, like, God, I was a bitch, like, because I was so annoyed. And he said, you're not annoyed at that person. You're annoyed at you. You didn't put the boundaries in. You didn't kind of lay the law. So you're frustrated at yourself because they haven't put you in that situation. You could have said no, but you didn't. So you're annoyed at yourself.
This conversation is so good because what you're saying to me is something that I've been going through recently. So actually, when you don't put boundaries in place, when you continually people please, fawn, and put everybody else ahead of your needs, where does the bitterness come? Within you.
Yes.
It's not about that person. The bitterness that you think at the surface is, oh, well, such and such is, It's you. You're annoyed with yourself.
Yeah.
You're pissed off with yourself. You're angry with yourself. But instead of going to yourself, you put that person's head on it. Because it's easier to blame them.
other people.
Now, that's not to say that individuals don't take advantage of a kind nature, because they do. But it's with you and your power to put the boundaries in place.
Yes.
And when you put that healthy boundary in place and you realise the first time you say no is small no, and you'll know what I mean. The smallest of no's. I'm sorry, I'm not free tonight. I'm sorry. Or even, for me, putting myself in this position, not ringing a person back if I've missed their call immediately. The fear of me not wanting to get back to them or initially responding to that person, because if I didn't, then I was letting them down. Whoa, where is that? Why? That's where counselling's come in for me. So to bring you back to your question, when I initially started this course, it was, I'm so literal. My partner laughs at me all the time. I was like, I'm going to do this course. I'm going to stop being a singer. I'm going to be a counsellor. It's not that. It's not that black and white. What's happened now is, oh, right. So actually, I could get to the end of this course, hypothetically speaking, because I'm not going to do this, but I could get to the end of this course and I could not take my career as a counsellor forward, and I could carry on with my current career, which I'm passionate about. And that would be enough. And that will be enough for some people on my course. Because the change that they've gone through within themselves
Is enough.
is enough. That's where I got to. Instead of worrying about the deadlines and the grades, which, you know, all of them have come back bar one that I need to resubmit. Instead of worrying about the final part of, and then when that course finishes, I need to be a counsellor. If I'm not a counsellor, I'm failed. That's gone. Because the journey of counselling is I needed to counsel me.
Yeah.
The therapy that I'm going through is for me.
Yeah.
So now I've got more tools, more sort of armor of the theory and these different techniques to help me. So when I'm in a therapy session in the future, I can empathize with my client because, as you know,
Yeah.
empathy and sympathy are two different things.
Yes.
And this is where people pleasing comes in. So I've been in sympathy for 25 years. In absolute sympathies. You come to me with a problem, we walk to a puddle and it looks like it's deep. You get in the puddle, I'll get in the puddle with you and we're both wet.
Yeah.
That's sympathy. Empathy is, hey, I can see you're in that puddle there. Let me give you a hand, let me help you out, and let's walk around that puddle together.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at. And it's a bit like when I first started meditating, I would tell everybody, you know, I was
Yeah.
I was
It'll
an
be
advocate
interesting
for
to
it.
talk about meditation, actually.
I was like, you got to try it. And I felt this like sense of pushing my, what had worked for me onto everybody else, which I understand now is not going to work. It's working for me. It's not working for everybody. If they want to try it and it works for them, brilliant.
Yeah.
But there's no one size fits all
No.
in any holistic procedure or any counselling.
Yeah.
Right? You could have a CBT counsellor where it's means tested and it's, you know, you've got action goals. But what if somebody wants to delve into their past? Psychodynamic is that.
Yes.
Psychodynamic is let's take you back to a point where maybe this issue that got you stuck in your present began.
Yeah.
You see? And
I
then
think like I find it really interesting, like talking about all the different techniques, because I always get told to meditate. And don't get me wrong, in lockdown, I really got into it. I was doing like a bit of yoga as well as like my running, my fitness, my CrossFit. I just had the time to do everything that I'd love to do every day. But I did feel, it sounds, when I say it out loud, I'm like, oh, you tit. But I was in a much better headspace. I'm really I feel like lockdown Ellie again now. Like I'm in a really good place and I know that meditation helps. But what I struggled with, which I've now learned is normal, I thought meditation didn't work for me because
I've heard that so many times.
because I couldn't switch my brain off. Like I went to a meditation the other day at Space where you've been.
We love
so
Space.
It was like after one of the full moon nights, I did the stage for meditation and she was talking us through it, and I think, but it's taught me about myself in the sense of when she's describing like, okay, so you're relaxing, I want you to picture a gate. I'm then thinking, well, is that the right gate?
Right.
What gate should I pick? Is that the right gate? No, I'm going to change the gate. And then it was...
Which by the way, is absolutely fine because, right, but what your mind is just trying to, it's still trying to be logic.
Yes.
Right? Guided meditations are brilliant for people that are, you know, that can't switch their thoughts
Yeah.
off. But here's the thing. You can't switch your thoughts off.
Yeah.
You can just get better at letting them settle.
Yes.
So I do Ayurvedic meditation, which is called transcendental meditation, which is the complete opposite of what people think meditation is. So it's not about switching your thoughts off. It's Ayurvedic, so it comes from India, but it's not a religion. Actually, the Beatles started it. Well, they brought it over and they wrote across the universe about it. So it's about a mantra, which you get whispered in your ear from a ceremony from a guru. And the mantra is everything and nothing. So the mantra, let's say the mantra is because you're not allowed to tell anybody your mantra.
Okay.
But let's say it's on air.
Okay.
So you sit down for 30 seconds and then you bring on air in, on air, on air, on air. And then you're like, I can't believe that bitch said that on air. And I think she better on air. And you've just got this dance of thought, mantra. And if you've got one of those sweet spots, the mantra will tip the scale and you'll transcend and you'll go somewhere just like you do before sleep. And then you'll come back like that.
Wow.
Not always,
Yeah.
but you could sit there for 20 minutes and you could actually be having
I think I'd
murder.
really struggle to get into that.
Right.
As in, you've sold it to me, I want to do it, but me knowing myself, I overthink every aspect. As in, I would be too focused on if I was doing it right. Because
Right.
what I have done, I've not spoken about this on the podcast actually, and I'd forgotten I'd even done it. It was probably around this time last year, I went to a breath workshop and we were like up in the hills of, not right up in the hills, we're by a waterfall on Watkins Path in Snowdon. And
Oh, yes, I remember you were talking about it. Is this
so
Wim
interesting.
Hof breathing?
Yeah. So it was it was all like the Wim Hof breathing. And my friend who had talked to me and told me to go, she was telling me all this stuff that like she saw her younger self. She was like hallucinating all these things. And I was like, that is not going to happen to me. And Zach was with us as well, and it didn't work for him because he really couldn't let go. Like, he is the stereotypical, we were all lying there in a field, no one's around us, and he couldn't relax because he kept on thinking someone was going to throw a brick at us.
Right.
So don't know what that says about his psyche, but with me,
It's a good analogy though, because I think a lot of people are thinking they can't relax
It's the vulnerable.
because something's going to throw a brick at them.
Yeah.
If you look at it.
Literally.
That's why this technique works for me, because you don't need anything. So all you need is a chair, and you don't even need silence. It's preferable.
Yeah.
But I've meditated all over the world in hotel lobbies, on buses, in restaurants. All I need is that chair to support me.
You're definitely going to have to teach me.
I
how
can't
to do
teach
it.
you
Damn
with
it.
this. With Ayurvedic, you have to be taught the specific way.
Right, okay.
But it's a beautiful
I'll
ceremony.
definitely look into it.
But I mean, you know me as a person. I've got a lot of energy. I'm really hyperactive. I was double that before I started this technique. It just grounded me a bit.
Yeah.
And now counselling has grounded me again.
Yeah.
Some of the feedback from my tutor said, when you first walked into seminar 1, I had like a little wheelie suitcase because I was traveling somewhere, and she said, you burst through the door and it was like this energy, and she thought, how is this going to become? And she said, and within 18 months, you're now grounded, settled, focused. Not that I wasn't those things, but I was definitely showing the rest of my peers a version of myself, which was a version of myself.
Yeah.
But now I don't need to do that because we're just in the work.
Yeah. So what other types of counselling have you learnt then?
So we're studying pluralistic counselling. So you've got psychodynamic, which is rooted in a person's past. Mm-hmm. You've got person-centered, which is the Carl Rogers theory. So you might have...
I've heard of this one, yeah.
That is where the autonomy on counselling is on you. So he believed everybody has the ability
To heal himself within
to
themselves.
self-actualize themselves. So the autonomy is on you, which is really powerful.
Yeah, I do.
Really.
At mine, I think we do like a mixture of person-centered and CBT.
Yeah.
And I might have done DBT as well. I don't know if I
Right.
just made that up.
DBT.
DBT.
Yeah, they're definitely used, especially if you, I think, are going through the NHS.
Mm-hmm.
CBT is the one that they use time and time again because it works. You know, if you get 6 sessions, you can be taken through those 6 sessions with results. Mm-hmm. So just to clarify, so psychodynamic, delving into the past, what has made you you, and what is potentially stopping you in your present from your past.
Yeah.
Human-centered is giving you full autonomy of you. So the way that the therapist works with you is very different.
Is this the one where, because my therapist like taught me through the different types that he does and like what it'll sound like when he's working in different ones. And is person-centered the one where they never tell you this is what you're doing, but they'll say, I'm hearing a lot of anger.
Right,
or something like
exactly,
that. And then you'll naturally, because I always had people, like my mum always said to me when I started, she was like, how do you start? Like, how do you start talking? And I was like, it's like magic, as in, I would feel really anxious before my first few sessions of like, how am I going to start to open up about stuff? I find it so easy, but this is a stranger. And you do it without realising because you just ask the right questions.
And that is exactly what counselling is.
Yeah.
That's it. the counsellor, there's two people in counselling, and there's one that's paying for it,
Yeah.
right? So the counsellor and the client are in this dance together, right? They've got to have full trust.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to have a rapport. There's got to be a therapeutic relationship. In order for you to open up, the counsellor's job is to make sure that eye contact, rapport,
Yeah.
body language, non-verbal communications are making the client relax.
Yeah.
And the art of counselling is there is no right or wrong.
Yeah.
There is no beginning, middle, and end.
Mm-hmm.
There's techniques that can be drawn in at different times. You could use all three of them on one session. You could just focus on another analogy.
Yeah.
If you're struggling to find a partner in your life now, what happened on your first date or your first partner?
Yeah.
What did they do? What was said to you? All of that.
Yeah.
It is.
It's fine.
It's like a dance between two people.
No, definitely, because I was saying on one of my last episodes was that I knew that I didn't want to do the type of counselling that is, tell me all your problems, let's talk it through. I knew that I was at a stage that I wanted, right, I can tell you dead easily how I'm feeling because I'm quite an open person. I don't mind sharing stuff about my past, but I'm sick of talking, a bit like procrastination. I'm sick of talking about my problems. I want to start fixing them.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that CBT, now when I first tried it, it was like group NHS one. It was horrific. Like, I'm sure they're doing the best they could do with the funding that they had. But I remember thinking, like, if this is someone's like last hope, like last ditch of trying to get help, that is sad because you're putting a load of anxious people in a room together and being like, so who resonates with this? And you're all looking at each other like, I'm not going to speak, are you going to speak?
Mm-hmm.
So really I use some techniques. I will always remember one session was you can't eat an elephant whole. And that stuck with me in the sense of like, stop trying to tackle your problems at once.
Mm-hmm.
Take them into bite-sized chunks and stuff like that. And then once I got more into like the therapy that I'm in now, it's very much like I like the uncomfortableness of it, which I didn't think I'd find myself saying, but
Right.
I like that I can't wriggle away because I wouldn't say we're all manipulative in different ways.
Yeah.
And I've never said this out loud before. I'm so good with people. Like, there might be some people watching this being like, but I do get on with people really well. I know, talking to different people, what they want from me. Mm-hmm. I can kind of like chameleon my way around.
No, that's emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I can
just to
really,
clarify.
thank you.
That's what it is.
And I think I kind of went into it being like, I'm going to be the one in control, which you are to a degree. So if there is stuff that I don't really think, I can kind of wiggle my way out of it and absolutely no room to wiggle. They see through you completely. And as uncomfortable as it is, the most uncomfortable therapy sessions that I've had have always been the most rewarding because you've really got to a problem that you didn't even realise you had.
Absolutely.
And they can pick that up on just your body language. Like, there's sometimes where he goes, oh, you're not comfortable with me saying that, are you? And I'm like, no, I'm fine with it. And it's like, well, you've just crossed your legs and leaned to the side, so you're retreating. And
Sometimes,
I'm like, wow.
and we've had this happen in class with our role players, you don't even realise the non-verbal communications. We read body language without counselling. Yeah. But when you're in that environment, the smallest thing can trigger you, and then they say, I'm noticing that you're playing with your hair. Those things that you've been doing when they're just pinpoint can unravel another layer.
And you're like, oh shit, yeah.
And the thing is, with counselling, there are people that will wriggle. I like that. You want to wriggle away. And there's a lot of people that will wriggle away a few times. Yeah. And sometimes they might never want to face the problems, and counselling isn't going to be for them, and they'll continue that cycle that they've always had because they've become accustomed to being in that cycle. Yeah. The best thing about counselling is that at some point, if you stop wriggling, you can find a bit of peace and you can actually look at it. And when you hit that one bit, then you can maybe just take a thing off. One more thing I want to say as well that I learned from the last 2 years. I used to think of the word trauma as as that. So I'm quite dramatic as a person.
Yeah.
So trauma for me
No.
would be, if I said trauma to you, what does that incite? For me, it's the operating room. It's being rushed into a hospital.
Yeah, it's like something.
Yeah.
Well, I know it sounds ironic, but it's hugely traumatic. Like something catastrophic has happened. That's what I
Absolutely.
associate with it.
So I've been going through my, 40 odd years of life, sort of 30 years thinking there'd been no trauma in my life, because trauma for me was something that was that,
Yeah.
it's terrible. It's like I get this wailing woman on the floor with a
Yeah.
child. That for me is trauma. That is trauma. But what has come through to me in my learnings is that it's the small T's that inevitably make the big trauma, and that's what tip people over the scale.
Definitely.
And we all know what happened in lockdown, so that's what I'm saying. So people that didn't even need or thought of themselves as wanting to have counselling or talking therapies, now it's like everybody has had trauma. So
Yeah. No, that is so interesting. I feel like I could talk to you
I know, it's been so good.
all day about everything. Have you enjoyed coming on?
I have, yeah.
I feel like you could be like a little section, as in like counselling with Rob on the podcast. I love that.
Cruise ships to counselling.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on. Do you want anybody to follow you on Instagram?
Yeah, because I was hacked recently, so get me
Oh,
back.
yes, you are. If you get the Rob that's offering you bitcoins,
I am
wrong
not
one.
offering you bitcoins, and I've not got a 4x4.
If you're offering the one sending you OnlyFans, you've got the right one.
Yeah, Robert Neil Sanderson.
Yeah, so you can
put my
find.
little-
Yeah, I'll put that on my. Well, I'll tag you in the video anyway.
Tag me in the video.
And as always, if you have any questions or you want to speak to me about anything we've spoken about today, you can find me on Instagram at ElliishPT.